Hello, and welcome to Algebra, Unit 3, Concept 3, Lesson 3. Today's objective is scholars will solve quadratic equations by taking the square root. Okay, so let's try this. So, how can we use square roots to find the solution to a quadratic equation? Well, these are the most basic quadratic equations you could have. X squared equals 49. Well, remember that in order to solve equations, we're just doing the opposite. Well, the opposite of squaring something is taking the square root. So we can take the square root of each side. The square root of x squared equals the square root of 49. Well, the square root of x squared is just to give us x. And the square root of 49, remember that every number has a positive and a negative square root. The square roots of 49 are 7 and negative 7. That's simple. Well, what about over here where we have x squared equals 75? Again, we're going to take the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared equals the square root of 75. Well, x squared is simply x. 75 can be rewritten as the square root of 5 times 5 times 3. If we remember what we did back in Concept 1. We can pull out our 5, say x is the positive and negative positive and negative 5 times the square root of 3. Remember, positive and negative. Or you could write that way. You could also go ahead and put it into your calculator and get approximate values for the square root of 75. In which case, I would want to round to the nearest hundredth. So x is approximately equal to positive and negative 8.66. Okay? So there's different ways to write it. So what if instead of just having x squared equals a number, we have something times x squared equals a number? Well, once again, that's pretty simple. The opposite of multiplying is division. So let's start with the left. Divide both sides by 7. I get x squared equals, pull out my handy-dandy calculator. 112 divided by 7 is 16. So if x squared is 16, we take the square roots of both sides. X equals positive and negative 4. Again, over here, next problem. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. So I get x squared equals negative 8. Well, here I have an issue. When I take my square roots, I'm going to get x equals the positive and negative square root of 8. So the problem is, or square root of negative 8. There is no square root of negative 8. So in this case, my answer is no real solutions. There are no real numbers that would make this true. So no real solutions. There are other solutions, but we're not going to get into those very much in this. And then let's go over here and look at this last problem. So what if I'm being multiplied by a negative fraction? Well, the opposite of multiplying this by a negative fraction, I'm going to multiply this entire thing by negative 2. That will give me x squared equals 72. And then, again, I'm just going to take my square root of both sides. I get x equals the positive and negative square root of 72. If I put that in my calculator to get an approximation, then I get x equals positive and negative 8.485, which rounds to 8.49. Make sure you're rounding correctly. Well, now, what if I have something I'm adding? Okay, again, we're going to solve this just like we've done other equations. So starting with this problem on the left, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So I end up with 3x squared equals 27. Then I'm going to divide by 3. I get x squared equals 9. Take the square root of both sides. X equals positive and negative 3. That could also be written as x equals 3 and negative 3, something like that. Okay, next one. First thing I'm going to do is add 19. So I have negative 5x squared equals, see, when I add 19 to 144, I get 163. Then I'm going to divide by negative 5. I get x squared equals negative 32.6. At this point, I know there's no real solutions. Because again, if I have a negative number to take the square root of, there's no real solutions. And then this final one over here. So first thing we do is subtract 17 from both sides. So I get 3x squared equals 192. Divide both sides by 3. I get x squared equals 64. When I take the square root, I get x equals the positive and negative square root of 64, which of course is 8. So x equals 8 and negative 8. Okay? So let's look at this in the real world context. A cell phone guy wire. The guy wire is this wire coming down right here. A guy wire is there for support. The height of the tower and the distance from the tower to where the guy wire is secured on the ground are the same distance. So see, these are both listed as being x. What is the height of the tower? So I know my guy wire is 200 feet long. In this case, I have the side lengths of my triangle are both x. I notice I have a right angle here. That means I'm going to be using the Pythagorean theorem. So I know I'm going to be using a squared plus b squared equals c squared. C is always my hypotenuse, which is the side across from my right angle. So now I have x squared plus x squared equals 200 squared. Well, x squared plus x squared is simply 2x squared. 200 squared is 40,000. So then I'm just going to divide both sides by 2. That gives me x squared equals 20,000. And then I can simply take the square root of both sides. So I get, in this case, I know it can be positive or negative, but I'm talking about the distance of a wire. So I know my only correct answer is going to be my negative answer. So the square root of 20,000 is approximately, do that sort of there, 141.42 feet. Again, this could be positive or negative, but because we're talking about a real world situation, it is positive. Let's try one more problem. In this case, we're finding the distance from the base of the tower to the midpoint of the guide wire. So now, this is the same, it's the same situation. So we know that this is the square root of 20,000 there. If the guy wire is 200 feet long, then half of it must be 100. Ooh, you can't see that at all, can you? Let's try a different color. 100. So now I know that this side is 100. I'm looking for this length right here. I know this side is that. So I have 100 squared plus z squared equals the square root of 20,000 squared. Remember that the 20,000 is over there because that is across from my right angle in this picture. So let's start solving this. So 100 squared is simply Add 2 more zeros, so it's 10,000. Plus z squared equals, if I have a square root then square it, it just becomes itself, equals 20,000. I'm going to subtract 10,000 from each side, so I have z squared equals 10,000. Take the square root, I get z equals 100. So I get z equals 100. Remember, even though the answer could be positive or negative mathematically, the only correct answer would be 100 because it is a real-world situation and the distance of the wire cannot be negative. Okay, so go ahead and try the problems that I've assigned you from your textbook, and I will see you all in class.